I won't go into detail now. There was a nice article a few years ago, some buddies of mine wrote in the California Management Review that I recommend. It was from 2008, and they talk about just this strategic problem, if anyone's interested in this. And basically, they identify 4 possible ways to respond. So, you know, you might want to think about this. You can either be negative or positive. If you're negative, you're probably fighting a tide that is not worth fighting. You can be either passive or active. So you can just say, oh, that's very nice, do what you want with it. Or you can actually go out there and encourage people to experiment with your brand. And depending on the course of action you choose, there's a lot of interesting managerial implications from that. So I would ask you to think about this, and maybe we will have time to discuss this later. Does your organization have a policy in place now to deal with the inevitable event, if it hasn't happened already, when you wake up one morning and your brand has been modified by your customers? How do you respond to that? You better be ready for it, because it's going to happen. Now, where is it happening? A lot of it, of course, is happening in cyberspace, needless to say, most of it. Here, a warning, here's a new book plug. I just want to give you a warning. I've got a new textbook coming out on social media. It's the first textbook on social media marketing, and coming out in January by Pearson. And what we tried to do is to think about all of these different forms of social media that are out there, and kind of push back against the thing that I hear a lot of times, which is, I have a social media strategy. We have a Facebook page. And of course, social media, and your students or your teenage children know this better than we do, social media encompasses a lot more than just Facebook. So when we organized this book, the reason I'm sharing this with you is not to sell a book, but to show you that we've tried to take a stab at least initially organizing all of these different social media platforms in terms of the functions that they serve. And so as you're thinking about communicating with customers as partners, it's worth thinking about what are your strategic objectives. In other words, for example, are you focusing primarily on relationship building? That's where Facebook comes in. You know, that's where they're very good. Commerce, you know, something like Groupon and so on, is a very different animal than Facebook. Publishing, for example, when people put their own views out there, consumer reviews, that's a major phenomenon today. Or entertainment, where people are going online and taking their identities online in order to stimulate themselves, to interact with others, basically to have a good time. And that's the remainder of what I want to say this morning. I want to focus on this zone, because that's where I think a lot of this brand identity is going, and that's where the real potential is for marketers. So again, we have the ability as professionals to alter images, and marketers have done this for years, so I like to think that that's not a real, you know, that those lips are not real on that pig, because, I don't know, that just would be scary. This is the Midwest, maybe you're used to seeing that, but you know, that's kind of scary to me. So we know that we can digitize stuff, and this is nothing new, so you know, typically you'll have an attractive woman like this, and you know, you'll put her into a fashion ad or something, but she's not going to look like that. I mean, she looks fine to me, but that's what she's going to look like by the time she gets into the ad. So obviously the men and women that we see in advertising literally don't exist in the real world, and never have. Sorry to disappoint you. So as we go offline to online, what are some of the changes that are going to happen in terms of this identity creation and management? Well, one thing is that we have to integrate the consumer experience. So it's important to recognize that your shopper is no longer just a physical shopper or an online shopper. We used to like to put people into buckets like that. As Forrester Research says, over the next 5 years, what we're going to see is that the successful retailers, for example, will understand that their customers, just like these kids I'm talking about, are going to bounce back and forth between the physical and virtual worlds seamlessly many, many times a day. So it's a mistake to create this arbitrary dichotomy. This is just an example of an earlier, an online application that I did. This was actually before the days of a lot of the technology we have today, but this was just an application where one of the first to use visuals online to let consumers express visually in an online format how they thought about their lives and how brands fit into their lives. So Just quickly, you know, basically what we would do is go through a process where, depending on the study, we would get people to log in from home. They would go through a process you're not going to see here, where they would go through actual photographs and pick the one that depicted their aspirational lifestyle, that is, who they really wanted to be. And then we would have them build a world of products around that. And I still think that logic is a pretty compelling one. So here, for whatever reason, this woman, you know, her dream is to be in a swimming pool with this guy. You know, I don't make the answers, I just report them. And we give people these categories, these different product categories. We can use any product categories. And as they go through each one, now we're going to ask them to populate the house of this ideal woman, and we're going to give them actual product images to look at there. So, for example, if they were furnishing their living room, we might give them pictures of carpeting or rugs. They would go through this process. They would pick the one that they think they want to have, and then the software replaces the icon with the actual picture. And then they just continue through that process and create a collage like you might do in a focus group. But in this case, we have it aggregated into a database that's underneath the application, so we can basically do a collage, but do it on you know, 1,000 women nationwide, for example, and wind up with an actual living space that tells us something about how they live. More recently, we see this phenomenon of advergaming. This basically means product placement in video games, and so again, the boundary between play and reality is disappearing, as increasingly when kids are going into games, you know, when they're racing around the racetrack, and when I say kids, I mean kids aged 65 and, you know, kids of all ages. They're racing around the racetrack, and of course all the billboards are for actual companies and so on. So again, there's that integration. The technology now, we can do virtual makeovers, so it's a risk-free way to see what you'd look like as a blonde. You know, you upload your picture, you can manipulate your picture, do all these things without actually going to the stylist. So what we see is this explosion of virtual worlds, and that's the area that I'm kind of passionate about. Many people don't know about these worlds, although millions and millions of people worldwide are engaging in them every day. If you've heard about virtual worlds, you've probably heard about, the most famous one is Second Life. Does everybody know Second Life? Okay, Second Life has kind of poisoned the well for a lot of virtual worlds. People say, oh, that's so 2008, you know. But I can assure you that this stuff is progressing with or without Second Life. In fact, as of January this year, a big benchmark was passed. 1 billion people globally were registered at a virtual world. 1 billion people. Last time I checked, a few weeks ago, that number was 1.4 billion people globally. So we are not talking about some fad here where just a few kids are going onto these sites. They're very relevant to for example, internal training, HR applications. Gartner projects that most organizations are going to develop their own virtual world within the next year or two. So these virtual worlds are a way for us to take our identity and project it, and to interact with others at the same time. So again, what happens is you take the graphics of a great video game like Madden football, you marry that with the real-time interactive capabilities of a chat room, and you wind up with a virtual world like this, where this is actually the lobby of my business building at St. Joseph's University. We have a virtual campus, and that avatar there is not me, that's my colleague. It's not me fantasizing or anything, it's my colleague who developed this with me. But the point is that we can take, this is the future of education in my opinion, where students will be able to come in Akron or Dayton or other far-flung places, and they can all come in at the same time and talk to one another at the same time in the same place, and that can all be archived. Now what's interesting in terms of identity is that, of course, everybody knows what an avatar is. Now, after the movie came out, made my life a lot easier, because now I don't have to explain what an avatar is. Now avatars, when you go into these virtual worlds, depending on which platform it is, you can take any appearance that you choose. So it's fascinating as a psychologist to ask, what appearance do people choose to project when they can be anybody they want to be?